heartbeat of America. Listen to the heartbeat of America. Yeah, it's the season in the air, the carnival in space. Out to make a magic place, feel the heartbeat of America.
When your heart beats for the great outdoors, see your Chevy dealer, where you'll find over 90 different ways to enjoy it all.
Oh, the heartbeat of America. Chevrolet. That's today's Chevy truck.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Workshop, brought to you by the Heartbeat of America, today's Chevy truck.
Warburton Productions presents How to Catch Walleye with Jay Warburton, Babe Winkleman, and Marv McCowan. And now, here's your host, Jay Warburton.
Walleye, once thought of as the king sport fish of the North. However, over the last 10 to 15 years, the various game and fish departments across the United States have introduced walleye into their propagation programs so successfully that walleye is quickly becoming the #1 sport fish in the nation. 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish because they take the time to learn how. Let me draw you a quick analogy. You wouldn't go to the sporting goods store and buy a set of golf clubs and just head out to the course and expect to shoot par consistently, not without taking the time to learn how and some instruction. Likewise, you wouldn't go to the sporting goods store and buy a fishing license, a rod and reel, and some lures and bait, and head out to your favorite lake and expect to catch walleyes consistently. No, you have to take the time to learn how. I am going to show you how to join that elite 10% of the walleye fishermen who catch 90% of the walleye. Come on in. Let's get started. This is an average size walleye weighing about 4.5 pounds, and depending on what part of the country you're from, it could be anywhere from 3 years to 5 years old. Of course, water temperatures have tendencies to be a little bit warmer the further south you go, and of course warmer water is more conducive to fish growing faster. But some of the characteristics of walleye that are very distinguishable, of course it got its name after the milky color in the eye itself, and the general color of a walleye is green on top, a yellowish tinge along the lateral line here, and white underneath. It depends on the environment that you find the walleye. If it's light-colored environment, sometimes the walleye will be a very light tinge in color. If you're fishing where the water is dark, then the walleye will change to fit its environment. Another unique characteristic of a walleye is this little white spot at the base of the tail. That white spot is prevalent even when the fish is fry size, a little bit larger. And a characteristic about the feeding habits of walleye is kind of interesting in relation to this white spot. Unlike many other species of game fish, walleye won't go long distances at a quick rate in order to feed. They use this little white spot. The fish itself will sit in a dormant type of a situation, and it'll just twitch the base of its tail, this little white mark here. And what that actually does, the motion of that tail will draw feed fish up here thinking that they can feed off of whatever that simulates, maybe a small minnow or something itself. The fish itself will then turn around instantly and have himself a quick meal. Another characteristic about walleye is the tooth structure. Now, when you first look at the tooth structure of a walleye, you think, holy smokes, that son of a gun will tear monofil line just like that. However, that's not the case. The teeth are very sharp indeed, and you've got to watch out that you don't cut yourself on them. But the structure, the contour of the teeth themselves is not conducive to breaking monofil line. Therefore, you can tie on your lures directly to mono. You do not need to have a wire leader like you would for northern pike. Now, let's get over here and discuss some of the methods on how to really catch walleyes. Jig fishing is one of the most productive methods for catching walleye in practically any situation. Now here's a variety of jigs. And the reason why you have such a broad variety in color variation of lures and jigs such as these right here is because you have to use different colors in different situations. There's a cute little saying that kind of fits color selection when it comes to jigs or practically any other type of a lure, and that's copper in the clouds, silver in the sunshine. In dark water, or if it's cloudy out or it's raining, in most instances, you will use dark-colored lures. That's kind of the opposite of what you would usually think. Most often, amateur or beginning fishermen think that you should use a bright-colored lure or jig in a dark situation because they think the fish can see it. But in natural circumstances, in practically every situation, a jig is simulating a fish, a small shiner, or something like that. Well, if the sun's shining, those little minnows throw off a real bright, shiny glare, and the fish attract to it. But if there isn't any bright situation, the shiners or minnows or bait is dark colored. Therefore, you use dark colors in dark situations, light colors in light situations. These are bullet head jigs. They work differently than the other style of jigs in the fact that they ride at a more vertical angle, and they do drop rather quickly. The rubber tail gives a real neat action to some of these particular jigs. These jigs here have this little silver strip, which gives the impression that it's a shiner or a minnow. And this jig over here, the head of it is flat, but at an angle. They don't quite hang up as often. These marabou jigs here are one of my particular favorites. The marabou feather is a real soft, fluffy type of a feather. It really gives it a lifelike effect. These floating jig heads have really added some new excitement to the sport of jig fishing. They will bring the bait up off the bottom. This style of jig is referred to as the sassy shad. You'll notice that there's a tail type effect at the bottom of it, and when that goes through the water, it wiggles and gives the effect like it's a fish swimming. These are often referred to as split-tail jigs or beetle jigs, and they have been a long-time favorite of professional fishermen across the nation for walleye. Now, these single-tail Mr. Twister jigs have been a long-time favorite of mine, as well as other professional fishermen across the country. These particular jigs introduced soft plastic jig fishing, and it got its name from the action that this tail gives as it goes through the water. It's very important that you have a large variety of jigs to choose from, because in certain situations you want to experiment, and experimentation is an important aspect to consistently catching walleyes using jigs. Now, one of my favorite rod-reel combinations for jig fishing is a 6.5 foot to 7 foot medium weight rod and an open face spinning reel loaded with 6 to 8 pound test line. Now let's go out to one of my favorite Midwestern walleye fishing lakes, Lake McConaughey in the western panhandle of Nebraska, where we're going to join professional fisherman Babe Winkleman and his guide Marv McGowan, who will show you exactly how to catch walleyes using jigs.
Hi, I'm with Guide Marv McGowan today. We're out on Lake McConaughey in central Nebraska, one of the all-time favorite walleye lakes across the United States. Marv has been fishing out here for a long time. Marv, give me a little idea of what this lake is like.
Dave, I think we're probably going to have a pretty good shot at it. Walleye have been real good this year, good sizes, especially at this time of the year. I think we'll probably find some real nice ones. I've seen some real big ones come out, 8-10 pounds so far this year. And there's no reason why we're not going to see some good ones in this one.
What do you think is going to be our best shot today?
I think we're going to have to look for some water that we can find somewhere around a 24-25 foot category, and we'll try to find some drop-offs and see what we can come up with there.
You think the walleye's going to come from that drop-off right up on the edge of the shelf then?
Yeah, I really do. We're getting into the warmer temperatures in the water, and I think we'll find them setting on those drop-offs, and we'll pick them up right in there, especially in this cove up here where this creek bed comes back right off the flat.
Right off the flat, right off the end of that point.
Right.
Hey, that sounds like jig and minnow time.
There's no doubt about it. I think
There you go.
that's exactly what we're going to have to do.
I know in a situation like this, there's some cotton pick and mini structures that the walleyes have to choose from. Most people come out here and say, well, where do we go? What do you do? Because everything looks good and it all looks the same. And the key is what's underwater, and that's that creek channel, where that creek channel is coming up against the structure, because it kind of gives the walleye a highway,
As a matter of fact, Dave, it looks like we're getting ready to come up on some walleye. There's some bait fish up above right now. We'll at about 15, 16 feet. What we'll do is go on out till we get about to 20 feet, 24 feet right there. Now you can see them. They're beginning to show up right now on the depth finder.
Well, let's catch them little critters.
Yeah, we're going to be able to do it here in just a minute. Well, there you go. Now you see it's dropped right on down about 24 foot. So this looks good. I think we ought to try it right here.
All right, let's go for it. You know, what we're going to be talking about in this segment is about jig fishing for walleyes. And in my opinion, the jig is the single most deadly bait system that can be used for any species of fish. And boy, that's particularly true when you're talking early season walleyes. First, let's take just a minute to understand why. See, the walleyes move by seasonal patterns. Early in the year, they're coming for their spawning movements. That time of the year, you're dealing with a fish that eating is not his predominant thing. Secondly, you've got very cold water, and the fish are lethargic because of that. They're just a slow-moving fish, and they're going to be up in the shallows, working various kinds of structure where they spawn or in and around it. Fish spawn on rocks. Generally, they like a little current action or some wind action. You might sometimes be looking for walleyes where there's a combination of so. When they get done spawning, they're going to leave the spawning grounds and work adjacent areas. In any of those conditions, the jig, with a jig and a minnow, or just a plain soft plastic jig like the plain old twister, either one of them can be really, really effective because they not only match the mood of the fish, but they match the condition that you're fishing, so it allows you the maximum advantage for presentation. Let's start first with the presentation. When those fish are extremely sluggish early in the year, they're not going to be moving fast. Your best bet is to keep that bait in contact with the bottom, but just kind of slide it. Just kind of ease it over the bottom, like so. Just moving it a little bit. Your pickup is not going to be strong. It's going to be you'll be working that jig along, and it'll feel just kind of like it was going through water, and it went from water into syrup. It gets heavy. It still moves a little bit with you, but it gets heavy. So you're just easing it along like so. Just bumping it, just kind of swimming it right over top of the rocks, but not letting it drop so much so you get into the rocks. You want to always keep your rod tip high so you're in good control, and when that strike comes, you can come down to it and hit it quick. A second type of a retrieve on a jig, other than the crawling retrieve, would be a swimming jig, and you might use that when you're working down a gradual drop-off with a lot of boulders, or say in an upcoming new weed bed where you've got the weed growth starting to come 6-8 inches a foot off of the ground. There, if you drag that bait through it, that puppy's going to get hung up all the time. So what you got to concentrate on is swimming the jig to a particular height right over the object. Their control is an important thing. You'll throw your bait out, leave it sink down to a specific depth right over the top, and then you want to pop it. You want to jerk it in a little swimming motion and keep that reel handle going. Keep the retrieve smooth so you keep it coming your way. Just swimming it right over the top of those, right over the top of the weeds, right over the top of the rocks. The key is once you touch them, you just pop that rod tip just a little bit, and it'll flutter right up on over it. Now, the action of your jig. First off, a walleye doesn't have the type of teeth that can bite your line off, so you're much better off if you tie the line directly to the jig. It'll give you a much better and a more natural presentation, a better swimming action to the jig. Secondly, the line size that you're using can make a difference. 12-pound line or 6-pound line will give two different actions to the same weight of a jig. The lighter the line, the more free, the more easy, the more natural the bait is going to come through the water, and the more strikes that you're going to get. Now you take a bait on this nature here, your straight old twister tail, or something like the sassy shad, they're baits that have got enough built-in action to them, so there's times, depending on the mood of the fish, that you can use a bait like this without having to go through the expensive live bait. Take after the spawning season when the water warms a little more and the fish get a little bit more active, or take a good cloudy day when they're coming up and they're going to get a little bit more aggressive. Then a bait like this with a swimming type of retrieve, man, are they effective. Throw it, and then you can set up a rhythm, a pumping rhythm to the thing, so you just keep it moving and keep that little tail swimming back and forth. Let them do their thing. Keep it moving, and big key is concentration, remembering and concentrating on what that jig is doing, because I'm afraid too many people, when they're fishing with a jig, are waiting for a smashing type of a strike. I mean, the thing just grabs it and pulls it out of their hand. That doesn't happen. More often than not, your bait is just trucking along like so, and the walleye comes up and from behind and just kind of mouths the bait, and it gets heavier. You'll feel a little twitch after it gets heavy. That's the time when you got to rear down and set the hook. Remember, I told you, the mood of those fish is lethargic at this time of the year. You're swimming that jig along, and you just barely sometimes feel a little bitty tap. It'll come on the background. Concentration is important. Whoop. There he is.
Using crankbaits is an entirely different form of fishing for walleyes. And as you can see, crankbaits come in a variety of different colors and shapes and sizes. Storm lures have long been known as some of the finest crankbaits you can possibly use. And recently, Storm Lures has developed what they call the Hottentot, which is a lifelike painted crankbait that has been slaying walleyes literally all over the country. It is rapidly becoming one of the most favorite walleye lures in the Great Lakes region. The thin-fin shad has long been known as a real walleye producer, and it still is one of the #1 walleye crankbaits you can find anywhere. It is very popular in the West, the Midwest, and is quickly becoming a popular lure in the South. When you use a wiggle wart and crank it in, that tongue really makes that plug move. The bug plug is another deep diver that really attracts walleyes. When fishing crankbaits or plugs for walleyes, one of my favorite rod-reel combinations is the Wright McGill graphite, a little bit heavier than you'd use for spinning, about a 5.5 foot, 6 foot at the most in length, and a good casting reel. Now let's go back out the lake and join Babe and Marv, who will explain to you the techniques of how to catch walleyes using crankbaits.
You know, you get used to fishing with these babies, and you can really rack up some nice fish. Early season, when the fish, after they get done spawning, in the evenings or in the middle of the night after dark, they're going to be moving up the shoal areas, gravel, the boulder shoal areas. In some cases, you'll have light weed growths up there. That time of the year, also that time of the year in river current, you're probably better off with some minnow imitating type of plug like this thin fin minnow or a baitfish type of a minnow. Something that you can move slow with a steady, even retrieve like so. Just cast the bait out, work it. Now this is going to be at night that you're going to be doing most of this. Turn the rod a bit to your side, just like I've got it here, and keep a steady, even retrieve, very, very slow. Just let that lure wobble enticingly kind of over the rocks. Now that's one type of retrieve. You get in a river current situation, you're better off throwing the plug out and just holding it in the current, letting the current go by the bait and give it that swimming type of a motion. Either way, you don't want it moving fast, you want it moving slow with an even retrieve that time of the year. But that's sure not the only time of the year that crankbaits are effective. Summer, to me, that's when crankbaits and various types and styles of them really come into their own. Baits like this. Little crank type baits, plugs, I don't know how they got their name. Originally it was simply because you can take a bait like so, you can cast it out and just crank it, and because of the nature of the bill of the bait, when you just retrieve it like so, the bait's got a built-in action. It has to do specific things. That's why they call it a crankbait. You can throw it out and crank it in. But boy, there's more tricks to it than that if you want to catch a lot of fish. One thing that's a big factor, anytime you're using a crank type of a bait, as far as giving the bait, a more enticing action, you might say, for the fish. And that's simply the addition of a tiny snap to the front of the O-ring. You don't want to use a snap swivel or it'll goof up your action. Just put a tiny rounded wire snap on the end of that dude, and it'll give it a much freer vibration. Now, there's a number of ways that crankbaits can be used, and they're, again, employ a little common sense. The bigger the crankbait's bill here, the deeper that it's going to dive, okay? If you take a little crankbait like this, it's going to only dive very shallow. You're working a rock structure that's got a very gradual incline. There's two ways you can do it. You can take a shallow build crankbait and cast it down and just work that top portion, or you can take a big build bait like this, cast it out, and start your retrieve initially slow so it's not digging to capacity, and follow that taper right down. That's one condition. A second condition is if you're parallel fishing a structure with a real steep drop-off bite. I mean, it's just like a cliff. There you're better off, rather than trying to hold the boat out and cast up on top, parallel cast it so you cast along the lengthways of the drop-off and really grind it down. Then your bait on the cast like so, it'll really get down to the depths. Now when you're fishing with a crankbait, keep that rod tip towards it. I like to keep my bait casting rod and reel like so I got it as a fulcrum. When the hit comes, you can react instantly, and that's important. Just like any other bait, too many people are waiting for the smashing strike where it rips out of your hand, and with a crankbait, that's true. That can happen sometimes. But most of the time, or a lot of the time, what you're noticing is just the end of the rod will just vibrate a little bit as that bait wobbles back and forth. Okay, the bait's going along, and a fish might come up right behind it and swim with you. So you won't be able to feel the strike, but you can detect it by watching the rod tip. When that vibration stops, it's time to set the hook, whether you think it's a fish or not. It can make a heck of a difference. Third type of a situation for this bait where it's really effective is in the evenings when the walleyes come way up on top of the rock reefs and the boulder shoals. Boy, it's tough to get any other type of a bait situation to them without getting hung up all the time. But with a floating diving crankbait such as this, you can. Just holding the boat out, casting to the top, using shiner colored baits, anything that's a minnow type pattern, something bright, and just crank it down over the reefs. Change speeds on it too. Not all fish like the same thing, just like you. You've got to make sure that bait is tuned and running right. When you cast it out, look down at, watch the way that it's running. You want it to run straight back in a straight line right back to your rod. If the bait's not, you're going to have to tune it by flipping the eye of that bait in the direction that it's running off to the side. If it's running to the right, you flip the eye to the right. If it's running to the left, the eye runs to the left. Keeping that bait running true will make a lot of difference in the amount of fish that you catch. Now there's other kinds of baits as well in systems and methods where we use crankbaits. Hot summer months, speed trolling a bait like this Hottentot can really produce some big fish. We're on a trip for that right now. Let's go fishing. Here, I'll get that.
Using spinners to catch walleyes is a unique and fun way to put walleyes on your stringer. And like every other form of fishing for walleyes, you'll notice that there's a different variety of spinners to use. These Chico spinners are what you refer to as straight shaft spinners. They are very, very productive on walleye. One of my favorites to use in the early springtime, especially when the walleyes are working the shallows. There again, you want to pay attention to size as well as color. This is what you refer to as a weight forward spinner. It really gives a unique action to the spinner blade where the walleyes can really be found. These are what you refer to as offset spinners. It gets its name because the spinner itself, or the spinner blade, is separated away from the lure. That blade moves freely and really attracts the attention of feeding walleye to the lure directly below it. Now my favorite rod-reel combination for spin fishing for walleyes is a 6.5 to 7 foot rod, medium weight, and in some cases lightweight, an open-face spinning reel loaded with 6 to 8 pound test line. Now let's go back out to Lake McConaughey and join Babe and Marv, and Babe is going to show you some real neat secrets for catching walleyes using spinners.
Spinners are probably one of the oldest lure systems for catching walleyes, and in some cases one of the most widely used, but well, I'm here to bet you that they're probably the least understood completely as a system. Baits like this one here is a new type of a spinner adaptation that just became popularized here a number of years ago over in Lake Erie when the walleye explosion took off. It's a weight-forward spinner called a Tom's Walleye Lure. What makes this thing unique and different from the rest of the spinners in that family is that it's got a keel type of a weight in front of the blade. Now you use that in a fishing situation where you're dealing with suspended fish a lot because you count the lure down after you make the cast, you let it get down to a particular depth and then a very slow, steady retrieve. You feel that blade just turning over real lightly. Just barely. Now, because of the keel weight type of situation, as you turn the rod this way and retrieve, what will happen is the lure will change direction in the water. When it changes direction, a lot of times that'll trigger a strike. Now, the Chico lure is a straight shaft spinner. Here that's a little bit different. This is a type of a bait that's been around for an awful long time, and this bait has got a dressing on it already, in this particular case a squirrel tail type of dressing here, where you don't have to add a live bait. You just take the bait itself, casting it out to the shoreline, retrieving it in. It's got a built-in action by the way the spinner is designed and the way the bait comes through the water in fish enticing appearance just by the way that the thing is built together. Fishing a straight shaft spinner like this, evenings, around brush piles, early summer is really good when the fish are up quite shallow and they move up in on the banks early evenings. Easy way to fish, quick way to fish, and a very, very productive one for that matter. You know, what we've covered so far are the straight shaft type of spinners, and here's a new spinner adaptation that's been really popular in the last number of years. It's a jig type of a spinner. This one happens to be a twister spin or a bait like the fuzzy grub spin. Either one of these work really well from your shallower to intermediate depths. But unlike the straight shaft spinners, you might want to give these a little different retrieve. Because of the offset design to the spinner blade shank, a pumping retrieve is sometimes best and let the bait flutter on back down to the bottom. Once it's down to the bottom, bring it in with a pumping fluttering motion, always keeping the line taut. So you reel it on down, because a lot of times the strike comes when the bait's falling, not when you're pulling up. And if you don't keep the line taut when you're reeling on down, you won't detect that kind of a strike. These jig spinners, when you get in deep water or the spin rig like this, boy, they can be deadly on those fish. Let's take a situation, for example, where you've got a point coming out from shoreline and you've got a little rocky knoll in front of it, and then she drops off to deep water. With one of these babies, it's real easy. You cast up to the top, start working it over the top of that shoal, and then when you get to the outside edge of the shoal, like I'm doing now, then you just start letting that bait flutter. And let it flutter, and you can fish right down the vertical face of a drop-off. For those big mamas hanging on the edge, man, it's deadly.
Bait fishing is one of the most popular and still one of the most productive ways to catch walleye. And right here are some of the most productive rigs for bait fishing, such as the bottom walker. What a bottom walker actually does, while it walks your bait along the bottom, it keeps it up in the main fish feeding zone without getting your lure or your rig snagged. Single-bladed, single-hook worm harnesses. These are very productive when you use night crawlers. In the world of bait fishing, nothing surpasses the walleye catching ability of the Lindy rig. The weight itself is designed to take the bait to the bottom with as little tension as possible. Rod and reel combinations for bait fishing are unique in the fact that almost any combination that you're comfortable with will work. It just so happens that I do like to use the casting rod and casting reel combination. However, don't be overly selective, because an open face reel with a spinning rod combination will work just fine. A closed face fishing reel will work fine. But the most important thing to remember is fish with a rod reel combination that you're comfortable with. Now let's go back to the lake where Babe will explain to you some real secret techniques for bait fishing for walleyes.
You know, when most of us get to go fishing and take our vacations is during the summer months. And the walleye at that time of the year goes down deep. He's hard for most people to get at. And for years and years, people thought you could only catch him during the spring or the fall. Then with the invention of the Lindy rigging system back a number of years back, we realized that there were ways we could really be productive in summer months, sometimes more productive than any other time of the year. The key to the Lindy rigging system is that it simply allows you to present the most natural bait to the fish, a live bait, in the most natural method possible. It starts with a snell here. It's 24 inches in length, and then they go on up to as long as 6 foot in length, and a tiny little hook and almost invisible thread-like line that ties down here into a special swivel clip. Clips onto the snell at one end, and then you tie it directly to your line, and it prevents your line twist. The third component is a specially shaped sliding sinker. It's got a shoe on the bottom, so it can take and slide up over rocks and walk over the bottom. Some folks call it a walking sinker because of that. Now, when you get a hit, the sinker can simply lay on the bottom, and the line can go through it. The finicky walleye, he doesn't even feel any weight whatsoever. He just grabs that little morsel you give him, he runs off to gobble it down. And that's what's nice about it, because he doesn't feel you. Okay, when you're fishing the Lindy rig with any kind of a system, principle is simple. Lob it over the side of the boat, let it sink to the bottom, then take and hook your line right here across your fingertip, the most sensitive part. As you're drifting or trolling, kind of keep the line taut so you feel that bottom, feel that sinker crawling over the area. Remain in constant contact. Now, at the tiniest bit of resistance, whether you think it's a fish or not, make sure by doing this right. At the tiniest bit of resistance, you drop your rod tip and you feed him line. Release your finger, just feed out the line. The fish will run with the bait for a period of time, then he'll stop. You just leave him go, and when he starts to take off again, now he's ready. So what you do, you take up all the slack like this, tighten down to the fish, tighten right down, and then sweep set him straight up. Just like so. So you get a real high driving set. See, the sinker might be here and he might have ran off clean over there, which means you've got to lift the sinker off of the bottom and take up all the slack in order to really drive that hook home. The sweep set's important. You know, with the Lindy rigging system, there's a lot of different kinds of baits you can use, and one of the keys is if you want the best results, you got to learn how to hook these baits up properly. See, you're presenting the bait to the fish the most natural way possible, and that's a big factor. First, let's start here with the leech, probably one of the deadliest walleye, all-around walleye baits you can use. A leech, by the way, is not a bloodsucker, I should tell you that, but you take the tiny leech rig here, and you hook him one time right up underneath the sucker, so the leech can swim out just as freely and naturally as possible, just like so. You let him swim out away from you like that, and then just with the principle of the Lindy rig. Now, a night crawler you use on the same kind of a hook, but that's a little bit different, okay? We take a night crawler and we hook him one time just through the tip of the nose, just like so. You can see by the crawler that he's got a collar up here, and that's his head in. Then you take one of these worm blowers here, and just on the very back of it, stick that needle in, put in a little bubble air. The key is you want the tail of that crawler to float up off of the bottom in better visibility for the walleyes. See, their primary feeding zone will be from 2 to 4 feet off of the bottom, and that's where this bait is going to be presented to them. Now, if you're fishing with a minnow or a salamander, then this size of a hook here is going to be a little too small. Then you need to go to the minnow size of a hook, which is about twice the size of this leech and crawler size one. Now, I've got one right here, and I'll show you what I mean. So it's a little bit bigger here, and we got some minis down here. First, let me get one of these little rascals. Okay, there's various kinds of minnows. Whoa! I'm back here, little fella. Good lively minnow is an important thing. There's various kinds of minnows you can use. What we've got here, we're fishing out Lake McConaughey today, and the sucker minnow is a very popular bait out here because it's a type of forage. But across the country, you'll find that your shiner minnows will be generally your best, your red-tailed chubs, your fathead minnows, something like that. Again, you hook them right up through the lip, just barely, so they can swim just as free and natural as possible. You don't want the walleye to know what's going on. Now, this little fella here, this has got to be one of my favorite when it comes to catching big walleyes, and it's something that's not real popular across the country. It's a little water dog. Again, like the minnow, you hook him one time barely up through the lips, so he's just as natural as can be. That little lizard or water dog, if you will produce more big walleyes than any single bait system that I know. Now, with the Lindy rigging system, that's the way you hook the 4 top baits that you're using. There's various sizes of sinkers that you'll be using, anywhere from 1/8 to 1.5 ounces. You match them with the wind direction, the trolling speed, and the water depth. Use the lightest one you can and still handle the situation, remain in good contact with the bottom. That's the key. But sometimes, for example, when you're fishing in an area with grass and weeds on the bottom, you're going to need to get the bait a little higher off of the bottom. Then you go to something like these floating jig heads here and just tie that on rather than the tiny hook, or this adjustable floating snell. Either one of them aid the buoyancy of the bait, and they'll get it a little higher off the bottom. If you want to really get it up, you take one of these floating snells and then put that bubble of air in the crawler too. Boy, you can get that puppy up real high and in good visibility. You know, another adaptation to the Lindy rigging system that's really, really effective in its own place, particularly in the warmer summer months, is a spinner in the crawler rig. Just most of the time, under normal conditions, you're using just a single hook with a spinner on it. A lot of different colors, chartreuse, orange, red, blue, like this, depending upon the day. Then you hook it simply just with one night crawler, thread the crawler right down on top the point of that hook, just a little bit away, down around like so. So she winds up like this in a straight line, and just let it stream out behind. Now, with a spinner and a crawler, you're going to be trucking down the bank pretty good, so you don't have to worry about blowing it up and so forth. Although, sometimes when you're fishing a spinner and a crawler, you're going to get short strikers. You'll have them biting off the end of the crawler where they won't hit the whole thing. You get a case like that, then you can take one of these, what we call a worm harness. It's a 3-hook rig, and you straighten it out, and you got a hook at the nose, and a hook in the middle, and a hook near the tail of the crawler. Trouble is, with a worm harness rig on slow days, sometimes they won't hit that rig with 3 hooks, where they'll hit the one with 1. As a normal rule, I'd rather use a single hook on the spinner than I would a crawler harness, but both of them are tools. For that matter, the whole rigging system is a bunch of tools. I carry a little toolbox here that's got everything in it. I've got rigs in here, I've got spinners, I've got floating jig heads, I've got every size of a sliding weight, swivel clips, because you never know what you're going to be up against when you're out there. The key is remember that the walleyes are not always going to be doing the same thing. And you can't just go out with a system that you like the best. What you've got to find is what the walleyes want the best. Give them a variety and let them pick out. Just that simple. Those fish don't just scatter all over when they get down into deep water. They work on the edges of things. For example, if you've got a point, you might find them out to the very tip of the point in deep water or right around the corners of the point. You might find them on the sides of sunken islands, on the edges of old creek channels where there's a bend, particularly where the bend in the creek channel comes up to shore. You're going to find them in pockets in the river system. All of these are in deep water, and the fish always hold in an exact spot. Bow control is the key for summer walleye fishing. Because those fish hold tight to structure, you've got to be able to put your boat in a position that gives you the maximum advantage on them. They're sitting right on the side of a point, for example, right on the side of a rock pile. You've got to be able to take that rig and put it right underneath there, right in front of their mouth. That's why we use bow control. When I say that, I mean things like drifting, controlled drifting, where you'll use an electric trolling motor or a big motor to help you follow an exact contour when drifting, or back trolling. And back trolling universally is probably the most effective method of boat control, because you can position your boat exactly and back troll following exactly along the contour, holding you, say, at the 17 to 18 foot depth level if you want to. If that's where you found the fish, that's going to be an important factor.
Prior to owning the Chevrolet, I had a Ford. Well, I switched to the Chevy because I like the looks better than the Ford. I found out that they had completely redid the truck. You need a 4-wheel drive truck. You don't want to have to get out and lock your wheels in. If you want to go into 4-wheel drive, you can just shift into it. This Chevrolet truck is the best vehicle I have ever owned.
Heartbeat of America, that's the Chevy truck.
If you don't believe it, just go out and try it yourself.
Other than the necessity of having a good rod and reel and a good selection of lures, there's a number of other items that can help you become a more successful fisherman and make your fishing a little bit easier, such as the anchor mate. That piece of equipment simply makes it easy for you to throw out an anchor and retrieve it. And, of course, fish locators. They've become very popular and almost a necessity if you're going to be a consistently successful fisherman. And Water Gremlin puts out a series of weights that you should have a good supply of in your tackle box, and they have a very unique way of packaging them. All you have to do is move this little dial right here, and you can spill the amount of weights that you want into your hand. And marker buoys. When you're trolling or just fishing along the shore and you catch a fish, you want to throw out a marker buoy right away so you know where you caught that fish, so you can go right back to it. And every fisherman needs a good fillet knife. A series of different size hooks and different varieties of hooks, such as snelled hooks, treble hooks, and single shank hooks. Another thing that's essential is that you keep your bait fresh, and Bait Canteen makes a unique little product that'll do the job for you. Make sure that you always keep it supplied with a good mixture of moss that Bait Canteen also supplies. And fish stringers, a necessary item. And for those hot days, make certain that you always have a good hat available. Now, For you fishermen who like to fish from shore, we're going to go back to Lake McConaughey and join Babe once again, because he's going to show you a very unique way to catch walleyes from shore.
You know, some folks prefer to fish walleyes from shore. If you happen to be one of those walleye fishermen, hey, we got a system for you that'll really make it effective. Shore fishing can be super productive at times, but it's sometimes difficult to get your bait to the right depth, and that's what this method really allows. It's a simple slip bobber rig, number 4 Eagle Claw bait holder hook here, a couple little water gremlin split shot, and then this Lindy sliding bobber. Now the bobber slides up and down the line up to a predetermined bobber stop. That's just a little knot of thread that you can put on, and that knot of thread is also adjustable. What's nice about it is you can take it and you can cast it all the way up in. Say you want to fish 12 foot of water. Set your bobber stop for 12 feet. You can bring it all the way up in, cast your thing, then just throw it out on your point. Give it slack line and let it feed through the bobber till it gets to your bobber stop, and it'll sit upright. It'll keep your bait at the exact depth off the bottom you want it. Say you've got a long point coming out here where a creek channel comes up against the point, or just a good steep drop off the edge of the point. Both of them are good places to shore fish, but sometimes it's hard to rig it up to get out there. With the slip bobber rig, you can set it for any depth that you want to. Still, it's easy to cast, easy to handle, and super effective.
Now that you've completed the schools on how to catch walleye using spinners, plugs, bait, and jigs, you too can go out to any pond, river, lake, or stream and catch your share of walleye and have a lot more fun doing it.
Fishing is a unique sport. I can't personally think of a better way to spend a day. In the hustle and bustle of today's world, you forget all about it. The water slapping against the side of the boat, splashing up against the rocks. Just the shoreline, the sun, the whole mood of everything, it kind of becomes part of you and you part of it. And you're part of that experience that's going on. It's something that, boy, you really can't describe to somebody unless they've been there. It's just there and it's unique.
Drifting on the water, running still and deep. Dreaming about tomorrow and where I'll be, hoping that the weather holds and I can still be free. Here's the secret of the walleye, come with me. Listening to the ripple of the water in my hand, thinking about the fishing across this big wide land. This Northland adventure is spreading across the country. Here's the secret of the walleye, come with me. Drifting on the water, running still and deep, dreaming about tomorrow and where I'll be, hoping that the weather holds and I can still be free. Here's the secret of the walleye, come with me. Listening to the ripple of the water in my hand, thinking about the fishing across this big wide land. This Northland adventure is spreading across the country. Here's the secret of the walleye, come with me. And you now know the secret, come with me.
Hi, my name is Jay Warburton, and I would like to invite you to enjoy other titles in the Sportsman's Workshop Video Library series. Babe Winkleman covers it all in how to catch walleyes: crankbaits, spinners, jigs, soft plastic lures, and live bait techniques. This video will assure you more consistent success in your fishing for walleye. The country's foremost big game guide, Dick Ray, takes professional outdoorsman Roger Moore on the hunt of a lifetime. These tips presented in How to Hunt the Majestic Elk will let you join the 20% of the hunters who take 80% of the trophies. In Decoys and Duck Calls, best-selling author Bob Brister will show you the secrets of using decoys and duck calls, adapting to weather and temperature conditions, proper gun selection, shell and shot size selection, and dozens of other secrets for duck hunting success. In How to Hunt Black Bears, you will join Roger Moore and Dick Ray as they seek out their trophy in the golden-covered slopes of the New Mexico Rockies during early fall. Using horses and hounds, you will learn Dick Ray's secrets for success as they bag a big boar. In Kids Plus Fishing Equals Fun, your family will learn all the basics as pros Roger Moore and Gary Klein take over 25 youngsters through the basics of casting, tying knots, rigging and baiting the hook and line, selecting and use of lures, and much, much more. Under the narrative expertise of Kurt Gowdy, you will enjoy the finest wildlife photography ever put on film. How to Hunt North American Big Game takes you into the homelands of grizzly bears, Alaskan moose, mountain lions, Dall sheep, mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, and many other big game animals. In How to Hunt Wild Turkeys, author and wildlife biologist J. Wayne Fears will introduce you to secrets to guarantee your hunting success. He'll show you the best turkey calls and how and when to use them, how to hunt in different kinds of turkey habitat, shotgun choice, and other necessary equipment you'll need. In Secrets for Catching Walleye, Babe Winkleman takes you even further into his secret world for consistently catching walleyes, covering new ways to rig live baits, work spinners, crankbaits, and soft plastic lures. In Introduction to Muzzleloading, Dick Gassaway takes you through the basics of black powder, including the fundamentals of loading and shooting black powder guns and the necessary equipment and accessories to get you started in this exciting sport. It's true, 10% of the bass fishermen catch 90% of the bass. In How to Catch Bass, professional bass fisherman Roger Moore takes you through an extensive crash course in fishing for lunker bass. Learn the secrets of John Wooters, a leading authority on white-tailed deer. He'll show you how to locate productive areas, stalking techniques, how to read buck rubs, horn rattling, bullet placement, and more in How to Hunt the White-tailed Deer. Archery Tactics for Deer presents the experience of America's most widely published bow hunting author, Chuck Adams, as he takes you through the fundamentals of equipment selection, proper clothing, when to hunt, where to hunt, tree stands and ground blinds, ambush strategy, stalking and still hunting, and many other tips for hunting success. Professional trout fisherman Rex Gerlach shows you all the secrets of successful trout fishing in How to Catch Trout. Whether pursuing rainbows in the Rocky Mountain stream or working a brook trout in some secluded northeast stream, Rex Gerlach's secrets will help you become a better fisherman. Bass Tactics That Work takes you fishing with bass champion Larry Nixon. Larry gives you his secrets for success on every aspect of the sport, including lure and bait selection, casting techniques, and tips on where and how to catch bass. How to use soft plastic lures. 4 famed anglers share fishing tips and preferences demonstrating how to use a wide variety of soft plastic lures. These pros share pointers on proper lure selection for walleye, bass, trout, striper, and panfish as they fish the Poudre River and the lakes of the Colorado Rockies. New titles will be continuously added to the Sportsman's Workshop Video Library series. Please ask your dealer about what topics are available.